Hey guys, welcome back to the Book Club podcast, where each month we read a contemporary or classic sci-fi or fantasy book. We talk about it and see what we can learn from it. My name is David.
My name is Laura.
At some point we'll have a consistent introduction, but today is not that day, folks.
Yeah, you're just kind of doing like the AFA intro, but a little bit different.
Well, it's because we do it infrequently enough that my brain doesn't have like muscle memory, and I have to try and remember what it's supposed to sound like. Not my most professional moment. I apologize. So it's December, and we, again, are a bit late on this because we were a bit late last month, but I forced myself to read this book, and I'll talk a bit about why it was so difficult as we get into it, but I forced myself to read it, and I got through it in like half a month. It nearly killed me. I lost a part of myself along the way. But I got it done because we're going to talk about Dune by Frank Herbert. And before we get into like the summary and all that stuff, what did you think of it? Had you read it before? Give me the goss, give me the lowdown.
Yeah, so I read it before once about, say, like a year or maybe less than a year ago. So it's still pretty fresh.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I kind of enjoy it. It's obviously not the type of reading that I go for normally.
Yeah, I don't think anyone normally... Like, it's not anyone's, like... I don't know.
Yeah.
It's so weird.
I don't know, yeah. But I think it's a very cleverly put together book.
It's very smart, yeah.
The first time I read it, I liked the first part better than
The palace stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Better than, like, the
desert
stuff in the desert.
Yeah.
This time, I'm kind of indifferent to, like...
Yeah, they're both...
Like...
Yeah. Yeah, I know what you mean. It's also hard, like, I guess, because one of the things... This book for me, and, like, I know when it was written, I know that it was kind of... We were talking about just before we hit record that one of the films that we looked at recently, last week's For Artist, was the film based on T. Lawrence's autobiography of his life, which was Lawrence of Arabia, and there's a lot of parallels with this. And one of the things about this story that made me a little bit uncomfortable and anxious, just like in general, as I read it, was like it has a lot of those weird appropriation things happening that were popular in that time, where like, you know, they have like the Messiah, but then also like this but it's this kind of Persian analog that's really not fleshed out at all, and sometimes comes across as racist, but at the same time, it's a commentary on people doing that, so they kind of give themselves a free pass. And we'll get into that, but I genuinely struggle to read this.
Yeah.
So what I did to start with is I read like the first 200 pages diligently.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was like, I'm going to do this amount of day, and I got through it. Like it was like homework, right? And then I went, I can't fucking do this. And I succumbed to the audiobook. Made it much easier. I think because of the names. Like I think I needed to hear someone repeatedly say the names and stuff a lot. Even though the main character is called Paul. But
I mean,
like,
the names aren't that hard.
It's a bit like Harry Potter, though, if you've never read Harry Potter before. Like, you think it's Hermione, not Hermione, because it's how it's... Like, it kind of had that problem for me, right? Every time I read it, I wanted to pronounce it differently.
So which names did you struggle with?
I have a list. I mean, Bene Gesserit I struggled with because I thought it was Bini, and then when the guy in the audiobook called him Gesserit, I was like, what the fuck? But like a lot of the people names I was fine with. It was everything else that made me made my brain hurt. Like Mentat, Thufir, Hawat, like stuff like that, which, yeah, I get that they're like leaning on different roots of different languages, but like, yeah, I just couldn't. After a while, I was like, I just need to hear someone read it to me, which helped.
Yeah. It didn't bother me in the way that a lot of fantasy type novels often bother me.
Mm-hmm.
A classic example of this is Aragon. The names in Aragon are a pain in the ass.
Because everything's like a
and then
of something
so
else.
you read the whole book of Aragon, and then you go into the back, and it's like, this is how you should be pronouncing it, and you go, that's not how I've been doing
It's
it.
fucking dumb. Make better names. You should make names so people read them and they go, I get it. Unless it's for a purpose.
But I mean, for this, like, I found they're close enough to sort of
a lot of them were similar
names
enough.
that I understand that it didn't really bother me.
I mean, main dude would be called Paul. Like, come on, gang.
Yeah, but even like Muad'Dib, I can do that.
Actually, that's a good point. I mean, I'll talk about it a bit later, but it reminded me a lot of The Painted Man by Peter V. Brett. I had to check the book to confirm that Peter V. Brett, because you're going to draw a lot of inspiration from this kind of storytelling. But before I get like into the summary properly, I don't know, how would you describe this book to people? Because I've been struggling with that.
Oh, jeez.
Because it's hard to pitch. Like,
Like,
do you know what I mean?
yeah, it's not really like a big sci-fi adventure.
But it's also not
so
like a
much as it-
spaghetti. It's not even like a spaghetti western.
Yeah,
It's
there's elements of intrigue, but even that
kind of
doesn't
just-
flow through the whole book.
it's kind of just like it starts as like a family drama, like, and then like it becomes like a political drama, and then it becomes a family drama, and then a political drama. It's like a really
Yeah.
high-strung version of Neighbours or something. I don't know, man. Like
Yeah.
it's got. I don't know how to
Like,
fucking talk
yeah,
about it.
it's and like things happen, and yeah, I don't. We'll get into it. But,
Yeah, it's just it's something to think about as we go through the episode. Is if you have an answer by the end, I'd love to hear it. Yeah, so Dune is a 1965 sci-fi novel by Frank Herbert, and tied with This Immortal for the Hugo Award in 1966, and won the inaugural Nebula Award for Best Novel. Nebula Award. Fuck, I can't read. I've been having a really long week, gang. It's technically the
so
world's.
have the rest of us.
It's only Tuesday when we're recording this. It's technically the world's best sci-fi selling novel of all time.
Crazy.
Technically, it's
Why
not
is it technically?
because they sold the most units, but it's not the most sell. Because okay, so they cheated because originally it came out in 2 books that were published in magazines, so they doubled up for a long time.
Okay.
Like it doesn't really rival some of the stuff that a few other people have done, but it's still pretty impressive, I think.
That is pretty impressive. Like it's like one of those sci-fi novels that everyone kind of knows the name of. It's like you say Dune, they go, oh, it's
It's
that
a book that
thing.
everyone pretends they've read.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's one which we're trying
Unless
to cover
you're like
on this.
us, in which case we actually read
You
it.
decide to read it for some reason. That's a lot of the books on this podcast, by the way.
Yeah.
Okay. Here we go. Summary. It's kind of an interesting one. I'm gonna mispronounce some names. Strap in.
It's gonna be a really long one, huh?
It's pretty long. Yeah, it's pretty fucking long. So, in the far future, humanity has given up on computers, instead using a spice named melange to give them the ability to is that how you say it? Melange?
I don't know.
Melange?
I've been pronouncing it like French, like melange, but
Melange is good, okay. In the far future, humanity has given up on computers, instead using a spice named melange to give them the ability to process super complex tasks in their own minds. The spice is only found on Arrakis, a desert planet where big-ass sandworms are the dominant form of life. Melange also provides periodic precognition, extended health, and life, and as a result becomes a universally accepted and sought-after currency. Melange also allows the Spacing Guild's navigators to safely route faster-than-light travel between planets, and helps the Reverend Mothers of the matriarchal Bene Gesserit to access their other memory, the ego and experiences of their female ancestors. When we join the story, each planet is owned by a great house that swears allegiance to the Empire. In order to remove a competitor in Duke Leto, the Emperor assigns House Atreides to Arrakis, where House Harkonnen rules, 2 houses with a deep, long feud. That's the key element to take away from there. They fucking hate each other. The Emperor secretly plans to attack Baron Vladimir of Harkonnen in order to pin the act on Leto. Leto immediately realizes the invitation to Arrakis is a trap, but with his trusted advisors Duncan Idaho the Swordsman, Mentat Thurfir Hawat, Suck Dr. Wellington Ewer, and Gurney Halleck prepare for every eventuality. I apologize for those names. Meanwhile, seemingly unrelated, Reverend Mother Mohiam accuses Leto's concubine, the Bene Gesserit Lady Jessica, of defying their secret centuries-long breeding program, which aimed to produce a male Bene Gesserit they call fucking Jesus again Kwisatz Haderach, who would have oracular powers to see through time and space. Jessica had been ordered to produce a daughter to continue the program, but out of love for Leto, she had given him a son, Paul Atreides. Jessica has since trained Paul in the Bene Gesserit way, and Mohiam is reluctantly impressed by the boy's abilities nonetheless. Despite Leto's caution, House Atreides takes over Arrakis, dealing with the constant traps left in the palace by the Harkonnens. As Leto and Duncan befriend the local freemen, House Harkonnen launches their attack, butchering House Atreides. Yue reveals he was forced to turn on Atreides. Duncan is killed, and Yue facilitates Paul and Jessica to escape. Yue replaces one of Leto's teeth with a poison capsule, hoping that Leto might have the opportunity to kill the Baron during their encounter, but of course it fails. Instead, Leto kills himself and Petra de Vries. The Baron forces Hawat to take over de Vries' position. While he follows the Baron's orders, Hawat secretly works out how to undermine the Harkonians at every turn, still working for his own side. Paul and Jessica flee into the desert, finding acceptance in the Freeman community of Siktabar. Paul proves his manhood and takes a Freeman lover, Chani, bearing her a son. Jessica becomes a Reverend Mother, inadvertently infusing her unborn child, Aaliyah, with the same powers she's aiming to acquire. 2 years pass, and Paul's precognition leads the Freeman to begin treating him as the Messiah, or the Mahdi. However, Paul is worried that the Freeman's war against aliens could quickly spiral out of control. In light of Freeman raids slowing spice production, the Baron makes some radical changes to his advisory, allowing Hautat to sow the seeds of doubt in the Baron's mind about the Emperor's true plans. Gurney finally finds Jessica and Paul, but believing Jessica was the traitor, he attempts to kill her. Paul intervenes, but confesses he didn't foresee the attack coming. Despite knowing it's fatal to men, Paul seeks to increase his precognition ability, drinking the waters of life. After spending several weeks in a coma, Paul wakes with clairvoyance across time and space. He is the actual Messiah now. He senses fleets gathering around Arrakis to cleanse the Freeman rebellion. Paul prepares the Freeman to attack Harkonnen's forces and, in effect, try and beat them to the punch. The Emperor responds to the rising conflict by sending an attacking force, killing Paul's son, and allowing Aaliyah to be captured. Aaliyah reveals that Paul is Muad'Dib. I can never... Muad'Dib. I'm in a lot of pain here, folks. I'm doing my best. At the same time, Paul and the Freeman ride sandworms and assault the capital. Meanwhile, in the confusion, Aaliyah assassinates the Baron in the chaos and escapes. Paul and the Freemans easily destroy the Harkonnen atop their sandworms. Paul confronts the Emperor and threatens to destroy the spice supply unless the Emperor gives up his throne. The Emperor reluctantly cedes the throne to Paul and promises his daughter, Princess Irulian's hand in marriage. As Paul takes control of the Empire, he realizes that while he achieved his goal, he is no longer able to stop the Freeman's jihad, as their belief in him is far too powerful to restrain. End of book. That was like having a migraine. Like, honestly, like, there was so many names in that. I feel drained. Is there anything you want to add to that? Because I feel like I covered the big beats.
Yeah.
It's a dense.
I had some comments
story.
like halfway through, and then you kept going, and I forgot them.
Oh no, okay. Because I feel like I could have paused, but man, I just don't want to like lose the momentum. Because some of those names make me just.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So Jessica, she bears Leto a son because he wants it, but she also senses the possibility that her son could be the Kwisatz Haderach. Which
is weird, right? Because there's an implication that she only senses that because when she drinks the waters of life, like there's a lot of like interesting circular prophecy in this story where like they go, oh well, this will happen because it was foretold, but in knowing the prophecy, they try and enact it almost. It's kind of really interesting, and there's a lot.
It's weird. It's like Paul is like, I could be this foretold one, so.
So I will try to be, and then when he drinks the waters of life, they're like, dude, it's gonna fucking kill you. And he's like, well, if I'm the foretold one, it's gonna work out, and if I'm not, I can't protect the people around me. Like, it's an interesting sort of, like, juxtaposition of, like, destiny as being, like, this kind of universal, force. Whereas in this story, it's not really that at all. It's, like, destiny is created by people consuming the spice. I don't know. It's a weird like anti-destiny thing. I don't know what to do with it in my head. So like with the spice itself as an element in a story, what did you think of that as like the magic in the world?
It's a weird one because it's not really magic in the way that most fantasy novels do magic. Where most fantasy novels, magic is, pardon me, accessible to pretty much anyone who has the power.
But you have to kind of be born with the innate ability a lot of the time.
In this universe, it's like anyone can consume the spice because it's a resource. Which is, I guess, where some of the sci-fi elements come in.
Well, that's where some of the criticism that clearly Herbert's angling at other sci-fi is involved, I think, too. Because there's clearly a really self-conscious effort on his part to be very, like, egalitarian and be, like... if you think about it, like, because I was thinking about this when I was making my notes and doing my research, if you think about it, anyone could be Paul.
Right.
Like, he just...
Well, he even says that Count Fenrig might have been the Kwisatz Haderach.
Anyone could be. It's like the opposite of Harry Potter. Where, like, there were two people that could have been the chosen one. It was either Neville or Harry. Whereas this is, like, literally anyone could become the Messiah if they get access to the right material. And there's something really interesting about that.
I mean, there's some stuff with, like, genetic material, and that's why Fenrig, I believe, was one of the possibles.
Right, but it's like generally speaking, if you did the Waters of Life and you could kind of orchestrate making a Messiah kind of thing. Whereas it's not like Superman where you have to be born special or whatever. And that's something that this novel made me I was like, this is such a weirdly interesting commentary on like messiahs and superheroes and stuff.
So what did you think of the Bene Gesserit?
In what way? What did I think of them? You have to be more specific because I have a lot of thoughts.
They have this like weird breeding program, and they appear to be able to control whether or not they conceive.
Yeah, it reminded me of like
whether or not it's a male or a female.
It reminded me a lot of like, in the most recent Mad Max Fury Road where he has like those concubines who are like his breeding kind of women or whatever.
Yeah.
It was that, but like also what if they could just control what happens? I was like, that is such an interesting like eugenics like thought experiment to be like, what if you could?
All of these powerful men, they know that they might not get the son that they want because these Bene Gesserit
they can just
under
decide.
orders. They can decide whether or not they want to have children.
It's so interesting.
But they still take them for like wives and stuff because they're really
Laura's dying, folks.
Because they're really powerful in that they have these powers of like intuition and they can control people sort of.
It's worth kind of having them on your side. Did you think, because as someone reading this where I'm like, I don't have the experience of the kind of expectation of like having to bear children. I thought it was interesting as a man reading this where I went, oh, there's some stuff in this that is like really creepy to me that kind of made my skin crawl. There's a point where they're talking about, I can't think of who's in the discussion, but they're describing or discussing like Jessica's kind of transgression. And there's a line, I didn't fucking copy it down. But it was something about like,
which is it close to the beginning?
I think so. I'm not sure if you'll be able to find it, but it was just really like, they kind of implied that even if she did it out of like emotion or passion, it was still like the wrong thing to do. And I was like, oh, interesting that they're trying to divorce, the act of having sex and copulating with like passion and even legacy. Like it's almost like it's an equation to be solved. Like having children in this world. It's really interesting. So I don't know if I liked it or not, or if I had like a strong opinion about it, but I thought that it was like one of those sci-fi ideas that I'm shocked hasn't been explored more. Like it'd be a great thing to copy, if you're going to write a sci-fi novel, just explore that concept. But yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about it. Looping back to the superhero thing, I want to run through some of my research and I'll see what you think about it.
Sure.
So this story does something really interesting with like taking the typical hero tropes and doing something weird with them. Mm-hmm. So Paul is basically like the atypical hero from like every story arc ever. Like he is the hero's journey. He has like this content life and then events intervene out of his control because of some outside evil force. He flees into the new world, tests allies, friends, and finds mentors. And through testing his valor and worldview, he's able to defeat the evil leader and finally return home, better and more rounded as a person. And what's interesting is that Herbert himself was really conscious of like doing this. Mm-hmm. So if you read it through a certain lens, it's very critical of that stuff. Because what Herbert was aiming to do was caution against like producing these kind of heroes and messiahs in like a very similar way to like Starship Troopers or something like that, where Herbert even said, and I quote, "Dune was aimed at this whole idea of the infallible leader because my view of history says that mistakes made by a leader, or in a leader's name, are amplified by the numbers who follow without question," end quote. So really what he's saying is like, no matter how much you follow someone, if they make an error, the more people that believe them without question, the bigger that error becomes because there's no stoppage. There's no like, we hold you accountable to logic or to reason. It's like, well, we believe in you, so we're going to ignore it. Which is interesting that a lot of these kind of fantasy stories keep bringing up these ideas of like...
Do you think that's the place that the jihad takes in the story?
Yes, because the jihad is the natural consequence of him working within a system that praises him as the Messiah.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, all throughout the novel he's talking about trying to stop this, but even early on he believes that the only way to stop it is to become emperor and take his rightful place because he's like, oh, at this point the legend's already been started. If I die, it'll happen anyway.
Which is kind of interesting too if you think about like, that idea of, oh, the only way, like the only way to stop like this regime that exists is to like oppose it, but he doesn't really stand for anything.
No.
Like Paul doesn't have a. We've talked about this multiple times on the show a lot recently for some reason, but like Paul doesn't have like a. He doesn't have like an ideology to replace it with. He just goes, well, these dudes are bad because they killed my family. I got to step up and do something about it.
Yeah.
Like these are bad blokes. But when he kind of goes through that process, the only thing he has is the power of being the Messiah, but like. And, like, I guess some weird kind of allegory about nature and society, and nature is better, but, like, at the same time, it's kind of flimsy.
Yeah.
But as we talked about before, like, in typical superhero stories, the specialness is, like, innate. Like, it's
Yeah.
the ego-driven
And
kind of superhero
an
thing.
interesting thing to note, I think, is that I believe Paul becomes the villain in the latter
The following
books.
stories, yeah. Which makes sense. Like, I mean, we've seen that before with... well, not before, but after the fact, like in more contemporary fiction with Brandon Sanderson's The Final Empire. There's a lot of really interesting stuff in that where, yeah, it's definitely like Paul does all this stuff in the name of like...
Even the stuff that he does in this book, some of it's a bit questionable.
A lot of it is. But at the same time, you go, well, I get where he's coming from. He's after revenge. But, you know, you can see how... Again, it's really interesting exploration of ideology where you go, oh, I can see how...
And you see this a lot with his father's sort of right-hand men and the way that they react to the things that that Paul does.
Mhm.
And they go, well, his father would never have sorry, my throat's really bad today. Well, they go, his father would never have thought of things before people.
Mhm. Yeah.
And they sort of use the father as like the just right man, but he doesn't get things done because he wants to play by the rules.
He's basically like the easiest way that I've explained this film to people is it's basically the first book of Game of Thrones, where Sean Bean's character, Eddard Stark, is the guy who wants to get it done with the rules and does his best.
Yeah.
And then failing that, you then have the character who has to step in and bend the rules a bit. But the problem is, as T.S. Eliot points out, like if you battle with monsters, you have to be caution that you yourself too doesn't become the monster.
Exactly.
And like there's something fucking fascinating to me in that Paul as a character is not special. Like he's a tiny bit special, but he's not that special, right? He's not like your egoist, superhero. He's not fucking Superman. He's not, he's not like Don Leone where he's like born into like all this power and money and stuff. Like Paul's powers are earned through like painful, difficult trauma and sacrifice. And in reality, as we talked about before, anyone could become Paul. My problem with the story is it's so fucking egalitarian that I can't decide if Herbert wants to agree with the Freeman and say the Freeman's basic idea is right, that they should have these beliefs about like, well, these aliens came in and they killed everyone, we should fight them or whatever. Or if we should agree with some of Paul's ideology where he's like, oh yeah, like we have to fight them because they did this bad stuff and I'm going to use these Freemans and their knowledge and I'm going to kind of appropriate their belief system to benefit me and I'm going to become their messiah, but also gain this power in doing so that is external to their belief system. And it's interesting to me because, like, I don't know, the idea of messiahs in Western society is so different than in like Eastern religion.
Yeah.
And some of the mirroring, also especially some of the mirroring like visual imagery and the coding they use for the Freeman. Especially the jihad and all those kinds of things, like, but at the same time they're drawing on the spaghetti western mythologies and stuff to generate Paul's character, clashing with these kind of Eastern ideologies and seeing him kind of appropriate and use all of that. It's no wonder that he's the villain in the next story because he's like a bad dude, like he's doing bad stuff.
Yeah.
Because I'm only speaking from like a purely like rhetoric perspective. Like this is stuff that I research a lot, and I'm pretty kosherized with it because we've spent the last 3 weeks researching Western mythology versus like the night stories in the 1001 Nights from way back. This is being purely from rhetoric. Like, is that something that you were conscious of when you were reading it? Like, were you picking up on when Paul was making those decisions? Were you going, hang on, but he's supposed to be, this kind of because he really takes the role of like the gunslinger style character in this, where he's like he's the protagonist. He rides the sandworms at the end. Like, it's fucking cool. Like when he's doing that stuff. Were you conscious of that kind of weird undertone throughout?
I mean, a little bit, not to a huge extent. It's not really something that's on my radar a lot.
Probably because you haven't spent 4 weeks deeply researching it. Probably, yeah. I'm well deep in the rabbit hole at this point, folks. Like I can't stop thinking about it. I'll pivot into gender in a bit because we touched on it a bit early on, but it's kind of a complicated one to talk about. But as I was kind of alluding to earlier, the nature stuff, like the Freemen are like Native American / Persian codes.
Yeah.
They're kind of, I don't know, I kind of found that a bit weird. I know it was in the 60s, but kind of reading it now, I'm like, oh, there's a lot of stuff in there that I'm a bit weird about.
Yeah, I mean,
it's just part of the times, I guess, you know.
Sort of.
They didn't have to. There's stories in that time that didn't do that, but sometimes when, like, you know, different Freemen, I mean, like, even the fact that, like, different Freeman characters, like, they have such an emphasis on, like manhood and sexuality and stuff like that. And then the women's roles, like the matriarchs, where it's like very like typical gender roles.
But even then, from the perspective of, so before Muad'Dib or Paul, their previous like leader was Liet Kynes, the planetologist, who also came from Offworld. Well, actually, no, his father came from Offworld, and he was the offspring of
basically Paul. He's basically Paul, like origin wise,
almost, except that like his father was Offworld, and he was the son of the previous planetologist, planetologist and a native woman. But basically the same thing. This foreign guy just you know coming in and leading them and giving them an ideology.
Did you like? Because that's kind of what happens in a lot of like the classics or non-revisionist Western stories. That's what tends to happen is you have this kind of gunslinger coming to the Old West, and you know they find the kind of super typical like quote unquote Indian tribes or whatever, and they have like this strong ideology, and they're able to lead them and kind of coerce them. But the planet, like the previous leader, like had this message of like ecology. Like I don't know, there's something really like charming about it, the kind of belief system he left behind, where he was like, protect the planet and the worms are great, and you're like, oh cool. And then Paul comes in and he uses all of that to his advantage. Yeah, he appropriates a weird word because I don't mean culturally appropriates. I mean literally in the verb sense, like gathers all of that stuff and uses it for his purpose. Yeah, like in his fighting and his.
And he uses a lot of other stuff that's been laid. So the prophecies that the Bene Gesserit brought to the planet centuries before. Yeah,
I've completely forgot. I forgot about that entirely. That's such an interesting.
And Jessica uses them too, actually.
That's a really interesting point, because in this story, it's supposedly these characters have these precognitive abilities, and we see Paul several times prove it. He's clearly pre-science, as they describe it. But at the same time, they take these prophecies that exist that are like written by the Freemen, and they kind of what's the word for it? Like they I don't know, abuses feels too harsh, but like they take them and they warp them into serving their own benefit. Like in the same way that when like during the Crusades and stuff, they took like the Bible and they used that as a weapon. They kind of weaponized that religion, and same with like the KKK and people like that. It's interesting that in the story, like you see that happening in real time, because it's like it's always inches, right? Yeah. It's never like one big swoop. It's like this tiny bit, then this tiny bit, and this tiny bit. And even like Jessica, like she seems aware of that, which is like interesting that Aaliyah becomes the person that kills the Baron. Yeah. Like I don't know, all of that stuff is fascinating because in the Jesus myth, you know, Joseph, who is kind of he's perpetrated against by the world, he births Jesus. He you know, him and Mary birth Jesus as a virgin birth, but at the same time Joseph is then cast out of the story. And if you read the other Gospels, which I highly recommend, they're fucking great, the non-canon Gospels describe Paul as like he had a lot of other stuff going on, and this was like a small part of his life. And that for me is what it felt like with Paul, where like he was Paul's father, where he was kind of, you know, he happened to birth the Messiah, but like that wasn't the pivotal point in his life.
There was a bunch of other stuff on Caladan where he amassed a bunch of power.
Which like it's sick. Like I love all of that backstory. And like I love when he gets to Arrakis. Like that stuff, like that's my jam. That's my political like intrigue shit that I love.
I know, that's why,
you know? I love
the beginning
that.
of this book is kind of great.
I was like way into it, and then I really started to struggle because then it got a bit too like heady and namey and stuff, and I was like, I need something to happen. And then it does, and it's great. But I don't know, there's something to that where even in the grand scheme of this like universe, this Messiah is he's just kind of a guy like that becomes the emperor. And spoilers for the other books, but like, you know, the other stories explore the idea of like anyone could be the hero to an extent. And it's interesting that, you know, in a time now where like you have this idea of, well, anyone can like do anything and all you have to do is believe in yourself. And we keep hearing that fucking rhetoric, and then at the same time you have people who are kind of running everything who are saying, yeah, just believe in yourself, but also, you know, just follow everything I say blindly or whatever. It's kind of what Paul does.
Yeah.
He's like, anyone could be me, but at the same time, do everything I say.
Yeah.
Don't do jihad, it's bad, but also do literally everything I tell you.
One thing that's there that I wanted to mention was something, so in the way that becoming the Messiah and a Reverend Mother affects Paul and Jessica respectively. And so at the beginning of the story, I find Jessica to be one of the most relatable characters. She's kind of the most human, and the most sort of...
She even just sounds normal.
Right.
A lot of the time, yeah.
And then like she becomes Reverend Mother and all this stuff happens and suddenly she's like...
She's above
barely
it all.
human.
Yeah, she's above it all, and she talks weird, and she starts putting on this affectation.
Yeah.
Did you think that was an affectation, or was that...
Well, I think it was sort of partially to show because sort of in becoming a Reverend Mother, she gains access to all this knowledge, but it sort of affects her in that she loses some of that ability to relate to human beings. And I feel that's part of what it is.
But is that related to the act of being the Reverend Mother, or just becoming someone in power? Like... Because I feel like in a lot of these, like in a lot of the story, that's
well, she had a decent amount of power before she became Reverend Mother when she was
that's true.
The concubine of the Duke.
Yeah, that's like top sex person is a pretty good spot to be in. Like top childbearer, like especially in this society.
Yeah,
like that's a good gig. You know, you got to work at that. I don't know. I feel like there's something there to be explored in the ideas it presents with like this kind of character, like especially because she starts off as so relatable. Same with Paul, and you watch them just become these, like, and you're
like, well, they're winning, but also
because you're on their side, and you're like, yeah, I see where they came from, but as they grow into these kind of mythic people, you go,
they're less people and more like
ideas are like they're like affecting something, and I don't know. There's something in that which makes me like, I don't know, Frank, like Herbert was onto something. Like he understood something about the way that the human brain processes power and like how we deal with power and stuff. Like the bigger you get, the less of a person you become, and the more of like a two-dimensional facade you end up being. Whether it's to other people or to yourself, we'll never know because we ain't no political powerhouse over here. But like you know what I mean? Like it's, you see people who are like bosses of big companies and they just have no empathy or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought of that. That's such an interesting like parallel though, where she becomes less human as he kind of becomes the kind of messiah. But like character-wise, like what were you vibing with? Like who was kind of, like, were you on Paul's side the whole time? Like how were you kind of feeling throughout the narrative?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much was on his side because basically the Harkonnens get built up to be the worst. Actually, on that, the way that they make Baron Vladimir Harkonnen the bad guy, aside from him just like killing Duke Leto,
just murdering folk,
yeah, aside from that and just being a power-hungry asshole, he also has a fetish for young boys that he drugs and brings to his bedroom.
I forgot about that until you mentioned it. I must have blanked that out of my memory. Yeah, don't do that, guy. I completely forgot about that because that was in my first 200 pages, and I was
He's literally a pedo.
Don't rape kids. That's our PSA from today.
Yep.
Pretty straightforward. Don't have sex with kids. Don't be raping kids. There you go. That's our PSA for today. I completely fucking forgot about that. Yeah, that's not a good thing a good person does.
No.
Though at the same time, Paul takes... Is it Ghani? I can't remember her name. Chani. And that's kind of weirdly non-consensual as well. Like yes and no. Like it's. I remember it being very like it's not as bad as like in Game of Thrones. Where
he's sort of like Sihaya, I've seen it. We're going to be together. And she's like, okay.
Yeah, he just tells her, and she's like, I guess we fuck now. Like, there's no, which I know it's like, I know what they're trying to do with it, but at the same time, I went, ooh, iffy.
Yeah.
Not great. But that's, like, again, because that's what you do when, like, the guy who can see the future says, hey, we'll be together. It's going to be great. You go, sure, I don't know any better. I'm young. Like, that's not like a Messiah thing. That's just older people
And then
in
he
general.
marries another girl, and you're like, what's up? Actually, I found the place that that this novel ends. So, like, the very last sentence of this book. So this is a quote from Jessica. She says, "Think on it, Chani. That princess will have the name, yet she'll live as less than a concubine, never to know a moment of tenderness from the man to whom she's bound. While we, Chani, we who carry the name of concubine, history will call us wives." That is the final sentence of this book.
Okay. And what do you think that kind of...
I just think it's a very interesting place to end it. So it's not on Paul or on him, like his triumph,
His greatness,
or his father's memory or whatever. It's to do with his mother and his lover.
It's about his, like, the legacy of the people that were close to him.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, not to get, like, too Freudian about it, but I've got a quote from Marjorie Hurahan, which I'm going to read, and then I want to, like, kind of give you my kind of, I don't know, it's something I think about a lot, because I've been spending some time speaking with some people, a particular person who I'm going to do a podcast with, who's a rap musician, and he talks about this a lot. But there's a quote from Marjorie Hurahan, and then we'll kind of delve into that.
Sure.
So Marjorie says, and I quote, "By far the most interesting character in the novel, Marjorie Hurahan, and I quote, Jessica is by far the most interesting character in the novel, and pointing out that while her son approaches a power which makes him almost an alien and a god to the reader, she remains for the most part relatively human. Throughout the novel, she struggles to maintain power in a male-dominated society, and manages at last to help her son at key moments in his realization of power. Crucially, though, she maintains her agency." Which I kind of love. Like, I love that she goes through the whole thing, but, like, she kind of still has the ability to pull the trigger and be like, no, don't do that. Or, no, I'm going to do this. She has the power to control, like, how she's remembered.
Yeah.
She goes, no, like, you know, sure, that's the person he married or whatever. But this princess that was married for, you know, tying alliances or whatever. But you'll be the person when they say the person the Messiah loved.
Yeah.
That's who that was.
Yeah.
And there's something interesting about that idea of emotion versus, like, kind of logical hierarchy.
And I feel like that's kind of true in that that's what people like. So people love, like, a love story, particularly when it's something that's that's, like, maybe not, like, easy, or, like, when it's something that it's like
It takes work.
They can't be married because
fucking Romeo and Juliet.
Reasons, yeah.
Two families can't do it. They kill themselves in the end. It's dumb, but, like, it's not really romantic. But, like, yeah, people love it because it's got that turmoil.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like that's definitely kind of what was the point you're gonna make about that? Because I can see the connection, but I would probably connect it a different way than you might to that kind of thought process.
Well, from like a historian perspective, you would be more interested in that concubine who maybe bore his children and had his affection than you would the random princess that he married just for political gain.
Yeah, because it was, like, part of his job.
Right.
You know, who's the chick in France, the famous mistress, Marie Antoinette?
No.
No? Who the fuck was Marie Antoinette?
She was Queen of France and she was beheaded.
It's not that one. It's someone else. Hang on.
Hold
I
on.
can Google
I know
this.
this.
She was in a spaceship in Doctor Who.
Renette Poisson.
Renette Poisson. What was her name, though? Hang on, I'm Googling it. If my internet is fast enough, I might be able to beat you. Madame de Pompadour!
Ah, God damn it.
Madame de Pompadour!
Yes! Yeah, no, I remember
Yes, but exactly. People don't fucking remember the queen. They remember the exact... That's such
the mistress, yeah.
The mistress, because she was the person that he loved and she had his heart.
Yeah.
And it's fucking wild to me that you can write, like, again, this is in the 60s, and I understand that, like, different time and place. Also, by the way, just for the record, if you Google Madame de Pompadour, 90% of the pictures are from Doctor Who.
Of course they are.
Yeah, like
This is Doctor Who.
because it's also a great episode.
Oh yeah, it is.
It's one of my favorite. Girl in the Fireplace. Shout outs Russell T Davies for stopping Stephen Moffat from making that bad.
Oh my god.
Drive by. But yeah, so like I think when thinking about this story, particularly in a modern context, it's important to like I guess interrogate a lot of those gender stereotypes because
Yeah.
like Herbert was more interested in how people view gender stereotypes than he was about interrogating them themselves.
Yeah.
So he was saying, well, how do women view themselves? Rather than saying, well, how does everyone treat women? Which I don't like. It's a fine thing to do. It was the 60s. I think it's fine to go, hey, well, what were the women thinking at this point? What did Madame de Pompadour think when, at this point in her life, when they kind of got everything they wanted, and, she was a mistress of the king, and her best mate was like, hey, like, don't, like, she's, and, Madame de Pompadour expresses her kind of insecurity, and her best mate goes, no, like, they're not going to fucking remember the other person. They're going to remember you, because of these reasons. And that's great, and I like that. But ending the story on that,
Yeah.
what's kind of your thoughts on that? Because I don't know. I'm
I don't
playing
really
with
know.
the lens cap. I apologize for audio listeners. I don't know what to do with that in my head.
Yeah, me neither. It's a weird place to end it, especially when I don't feel that that's been the focus of the rest of it. But it's kind of where Herbert chose to have the final resting point of this novel.
I wonder if it's because the whole story is so focused in bringing about Paul's inauguration as the Messiah.
Yeah.
That potentially, when he was writing this, I'm not sure that Herbert had a sequel in mind. Maybe I haven't done research on I know there's 3 sequels, but or 2 rather. I haven't done actual research on whether he intended to write more. But it vibes to me as if when they were going through the editing process, his editor said, "Well, what's the story about?" And he went, "I don't know, Paul, as being a Messiah." And he went, no, maybe actually it's about the people that have to live with the person who becomes the leader. It's about the aftermath of someone who becomes so powerful and so important that everyone around them has to kind of recoil and deal with it. And they're kind of left in the wash of the fallout of those decisions.
And even Paul remarks on this to a certain extent where Stilgar, he starts off as a strong leader and a friend to Paul, and he ends the novel as just kind of one of Paul's lackeys, and Paul remarks upon this and he thinks of it as a shame.
I feel the same way about Paul's dad and Idaho the swordsman.
Oh, yeah.
Because I thought that was a really interesting parallel as I was reading through, and I got to that point in the novel where it was a lot of his best friends who were his best advisors are just kind of errand boys now.
Yeah.
When Paul becomes the Messiah. In this story, you expect Paul to have an offsider, a guy who's that will do the dirty work, but he kind of isn't one. I was running through a list, in my head through the characters when I was writing this research, and I was like, he doesn't have a second dude, like a B man that he can roll in who's got the pistol, or he doesn't have an Idaho.
Yeah.
And it turns out the result of not having an Idaho to do your dirty work is that you have to take on the responsibility of everything yourself. And if you're not careful, that makes you into the kind of the Messiah figure. If you don't have people around you who can help you out and you take everything on yourself, for better or for worse, you're either going to really succeed and become something that you can't recognize, or you kind of fail and you burn out, you kind of get killed by the other house. I don't know, there's something really interesting about those kind of parallels. And I'm not sure what I think about it, but it was something that I couldn't stop overanalyzing when I was first reading it. He didn't rest back on his laurels and go, well, we need to give Paul an equivalent of Idaho, and he didn't go through the list of characters and give him the equivalents. Yeah. He went, what if he didn't have those and he had these other people instead, and he had to kind of manipulate these natives into doing his bidding, whether maliciously or not.
Yeah.
That was what he did. It's again, I keep trying to think of a way to talk about the story except saying that it's so complicated and weird. I just, because it is, and there's it's not modern fiction.
It's one of those things you just kind of have to read if you want to know what it's about, because there's so much that happens, and even just a summary doesn't really do all the themes and the intrigues and all
the
the
little
stuff.
bits and the kind of it's so micro the way the story works well. Like
Yeah.
it's very like moment to moment, which is so hard to do. But again, like I found it so hard to read, but when I was listening to it, like I kind of started to feel the rhythm. And it's only just because it's old, like because of the way I write. If you read any of my
Fair
stuff,
enough.
like I'm very Gaiman-y in my writing, where like I kind of Gaiman plus Rothfuss, where it's all
Yeah.
very stripped back.
Whereas I probably found it a lot easier because I do enjoy reading classics, and
Plus, you also like description, so like
Yeah.
you enjoy it.
a big portion of the reading that I do for fun is historical romance. So,
Yeah,
same sort of boat, but, different genre.
but like not too different if you think about it. Because again, like every sci-fi novel, and I'll say it again, and every sci-fi novel gets mad at me, but every sci-fi novel is basically a very complicated romance. Because they all are. Fuck you, Star Wars. Fuck you, Ryan Johnson. I got your fucking number. Yeah, like that, because that again is something that, although there's a quote that I love, and I don't know who said it, and I can't quote them, but it's someone famous, and I can't remember. But like, it might have been Watsky actually. I can't remember, but it's if we're all being honest with ourselves, people always say like, oh well, a love story is universal, but not everyone experiences love.
Yeah.
The most universal stories are ones about death, because everybody dies.
Yeah.
That to me is like something that this story really hits on the head well, is like one of the things that we all experience in our life is being not the person in charge. And everything that, one thing that everyone experiences is seeing people in power treat that power in a way that is not healthy and is irresponsible. But if you have enough empathy, you can articulate and isolate where that power came from and where that kind of lack of empathy came from. And I think the trick in moving your society forward is in telling stories like this, because what it does is when you look at the state of the world now, and apparently this is the direction we're going in general, if you look at the state of the world now and you can read a story like this and understand how Paul became the person he is at the end of the story,
Yeah.
then you can look at some of the people that are leading the thought and the storytelling and the politics of our world, and you can go, I get how they got there. And you can empathize with them, and not sympathize, but you can empathize and go, okay, well, the solution is not to fight against them and other them. The solution is to go, well, how do we prevent this in the future? And that's what the other stories in this trilogy do. But it's fascinating to me that in the same way that Starship Troopers presents, this perfect like kind of ideology where you buy in and everyone is like really like sexy and attractive, and like the totalitarianism is like really cool and you want to fight the aliens because they're evil. And in the same way, this story gives you like the kind of, it's like the extreme Star Wars where like the rebels are so right all the time and the Empire are like the super duper baddies. And you follow Luke because he's the Messiah, you follow Paul because he's the guy, and at the end of the day, like he becomes the very thing you were fighting against. And that is like, again, such like a beautiful message for a book that came out in 62, which was like just post, or 65, which was just post, post World War II, getting to the Cold War. Like it's a time in the world where people are really suspicious of leaders, and it's Reagan, it's Watergate, it's all those things. And I don't know,
That's an interesting way to look at it from a historical perspective, actually.
It's more relevant now than it's ever been, if we're being honest, because that stuff is happening again. Like all that Cold War stuff. That it's great. The world's going really well. Like, but this like they have a TV movie star who's in charge of a big country again. Like it's all cyclical, and stories like this are more relevant than ever. And I just appreciate that Herbert was very critical of all of those ideas that were being peddled, and even though there's some really weird racial coding and like some religious stuff that I disagree with, I struggled to read this book, but I fucking love what it was trying to do.
Yeah.
However, next month we're doing The Hogfather.
Oh, cool.
Because people voted for it.
Yay!
Because I put it twice on the list.
You did?
I did.
Oh my god.
I really wanted to cover this book.
I love this novel. So, in case you didn't know,
but it's by Terry Pratchett.
I am a big fan of Terry Pratchett.
Also,
I've read, I think, every one of his books.
I've read two of
I
his.
started in high school and I made a list and I ticked them off as I read them.
Laura's the ultimate nerd. I'm pretty bad, but she's worse. Yeah, I'm fucking excited. I've seen the film.
Ah, the film is great too.
And the film is delightful, but I'm so excited to read the book. And honestly, like, it's gonna be Christmas.
If you want a good Christmas movie, like, watch it's like a 2-part TV series, The Hogfather. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Give it a watch.
I'm gonna hang on just a sec. I gotta find out who that is. Because there is a bunch of famous actors in it.
Yeah. I absolutely love the character of Susan. She's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
She's the granddaughter of Death.
She's kind of just kicking it, man.
She's dope.
Let me see. First broadcast on Sky One and Sky One HD. Who were the actors? It was Michelle Dockery, who is a phenomenal actor.
She is amazing. I love her.
The whole story is great. I highly recommend reading the book.
Yeah.
We're going to be covering that next month. Listen. Dune made me want to have a migraine. Hogfather makes me excited because I fucking love Terry Pratchett.
I'll just be smiling all week.
I've never read it.
Have you not? It's awesome. Everything. I find pretty much everything that Pratchett writes is delightful in that he gives like this commentary on life and human society, but he does it in such a way that, you know what, he makes a bit of a comment, you're like, oh, that's kind of a clever comment, but then like the next paragraph, it's like here's like he comments on it in a way that's also funny.
Yeah, well, he's a very humorous writer, and if I'm being honest, I haven't read a whole book of his. I've read like some of his short stories, but I've never read Terry Pratchett.
Dude.
Well, because he was one of the writers that they were like, don't read if you're going to be a writer, because like it's like if you're a guitarist and you listen to like James Dean.
Yeah.
All you can do is play James Dean style songs for 8 years. But I have a voice and writing style now, so I should be fine.
Yes.
It's part of the show where we wrap up and plug shit.
Yeah.
Look, if
we
you
should
want
probably save the Terry Pratchett for next month.
Yeah, I was gonna say we can fucking talk about Terry Pratchett for hours.
Oh.
But yeah, if you want to support us and all those good things, we're DCM Works everywhere. Patreon.com/DCMWorks to support us. We've got not next week, but the week after, we have our big. Sorry, actually, it is next week. We have our big end of year finale coming up. Our best of 2018.
You still haven't told me what the categories are.
The categories are the same as last year. I just haven't looked up my document. And we have a bunch of very special guests across the DCM Works universe.
Woo! We have a universe now?
We do. It's a lore situation. We've got Aaron, we've got Scott, we've got Laura, we've got Ben. Maybe even Adley will be joining us. It's going to be a hoot and a holler.
From across the pond.
From across the pond on the Skype. And we're going to hear about everyone's favorite things from the year that has been. If you want to send us anything and tell us your favorites, follow us on Twitter and tweet at us, DCM_works. And always feel free to yell at us if you think we're wrong. Because we'll be talking about best films, best TV shows, best podcasts, best music albums. There's a whole bunch of categories. I'll post them on Twitter at some point in the next few weeks when we finalize them. Very excited about it. Then we're going to get drunk and play Smash Brothers, which we might record. We'll see how it goes.
Yay.
Yes, you can let us know anything you want to recommend as a best of category or best of thing. Tweet at us, DCM_works. Or if you just want to support what we do, patreon.com/DCMworks. It really does help us. But honestly, the best way to help us is to tell one friend who you think might enjoy this. Because genuinely, if 2 people really enjoy this and you tell a third person, that's all we're asking for. Because we make it because we think that it's something that's worth consuming, we think it's something that's worth time, and we think it's valuable. And it's not about getting 10, 100,000 million subscribers, but, sometimes good art's enough. So tell one guy. Tell your nan. She's not busy. She's retired. Tell your grandmother. She's also retired.
She might enjoy us talking about June for, an hour?
I didn't even say any super rude words this time. Just fuck a lot. It's normally the part in the podcast where I make a joke about the C word, but I'm not going to do it this time, because what if your nan listens? But yeah, otherwise, if you want to follow us individually, I'm at DCM Hit Pie.
I'm at Laura Ducky B.
We'll see you guys next month.